Here's a little challenge for you. Very quickly, no Googling, try and think of a video game that doesn't have a single boss fight. Aside from the obvious titles like sports games, walking simulators, it's genuinely quite hard to think of an example off the top of your head. Boss battles are one of the longest standing tropes in the video game realm and have been around for decades at this point, so it's no surprise that they're bloody everywhere. And so whenever you're playing through a story and you bump into a bad guy, there's no reason to assume that you won't get the chance to kick their ass at some point down the line. But that's not always the case. Especially in contemporary games, a lot of bosses are dealt with via cutscene, with limited or non-existent input by the player. This isn't always a bad thing. It's still possible to give a villain a memorable send-off without any interactivity involved, but it can sometimes sting a little when you're denied the satisfaction of beating up a boss with your own 2 thumbs on those sticks. So I am Kirsten from WhatCulture Gaming, and these are 10 video game bosses you never get to fight. Number 10. The Angel, Resistance, Fall of Man. Throughout PS3 launch title Resistance Fall of Man, no-nonsense protagonist Nathan Hale blasts his way through a wide range of different Chimeran enemies, from standard soldier types to the scorpion-like insects known as leapers. However, during the story we learn that the most powerful form of Chimera are the Angels, creatures that have the ability to control all other strains of species. Due to their telepathic powers, they're essentially the mothership for the Chimeran race, and taking one of them out could cause many other Chimera to die as a result. Based on that information, it's clear that the Angels are the major threat that must be destroyed at all costs, which from the player's point of view seems to be pointing towards an epic boss fight. But when Hale comes across an Angel in an underground bunker, he blasts it with his rifle for a few seconds and it dies in a cutscene. Because Angels were billed as the biggest and baddest Chimeran enemies, there was an element of, oh, is that it? To this plot development, and while Hale encounters more Angels later in the game, by that point they're presented as just another enemy for you to kill, not the all-powerful godly beasts that we were previously thought they were. Number 9. Professor Nakayama, Borderlands 2. Self-aware humour is a key component of the Borderlands series, and the games frequently break the fourth wall and mess with player expectations in a host of funny ways. A particularly hilarious example of the latter can be found in Borderlands 2's Big Game Hunt DLC, during the final story mission, The Fall of Nakayama. This mission has one simple objective: kill Professor Nakayama. To get to him, you have to fight your way through some regular enemies and slay the monstrous Jackenstein, and once you've done that, Nakayama will reveal himself, not in that way, and all of your gamer instincts will be preparing you for a boss fight against this guy, considering that he's in the title of the mission. But instead, Nakayama monologues for a short moment, falls down the stairs, and then dies. The mission then ends, and you can go and claim your rewards. For Nakayama to perish in this way was the last thing anyone expected, a twist that was just as funny as it was surprising. Number 8. Darth Vader, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. That scene in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order where Trilla cries, "Avenge us!" before Darth Vader cuts her down was one of the most oh my god gaming moments of 2019, and led to an encounter with the iconic villain that few will ever forget, even though we didn't really get to fight him. From the second that Vader shows his famous face at the end of the game, it's made abundantly clear that protagonist Cal doesn't stand a chance against him, even though at this point you've spent the entire game learning new abilities and unlocking some sweet new combat skills, and so there's no boss fight here. Instead, the game simply asks for you to run for your life. Granted, there are a few quick time events peppered here and there, and one bit near the start of the scene where you get to swing your lightsaber, but the whole point of this encounter is to show that Vader is vastly more powerful than Cal is, so for the majority of the sequence, you'll be running away as fast as you can. Thankfully though, this wasn't a case of no boss fight. That sucks, because the scene was tense, well-paced, and above all else, fitting. A Jedi as relatively inexperienced as Cal would not realistically be able to duel Vader and live to tell the tale. Number 7. The Rampaging Yeti, Spyro 2 RIPTO'S Rage. There are a couple of boss battles in Spyro 2, and because the game is meant to be accessible for people of all ages, none of them are particularly challenging, although the fight against Gulp, as the remastered trilogy reminds us, is highly annoying. And a boss that poses literally no challenge whatsoever is the Yeti in the Colossus level, because yes, you don't even have to fight him. When you first load into the level, you'll watch a cutscene in which the Yeti terrorizes some monks, before one of said monks tells you that a Yeti has been rampaging around our home. It's clear that they want you to help them out, and as you progress, you'll open more pathways that lead you right to the troublesome fairy beast. But then something unexpected happens. Instead of a boss battle, or even instead of a simple combat encounter where you torch him with your flame breath, a cutscene plays. The Yeti roars, the roof gives way, and he gets crushed. It's a funny little moment because mainly you've spent the entire level expecting a fight against the creature, and it fits in perfectly with the light-hearted humour and oddball charm found throughout the Spyro trilogy. Number 6. Marlow, Uncharted 3, Drake's Deception. While each of the Uncharted games features an assortment of bad guys, they all let you fight the main villain of the piece. In Uncharted Drake's Fortune, you fight Navarro aboard his boat. In Uncharted 2, you fight Lazarevic inside the ancient tree, and in Uncharted 4, you fight Rafe inside Avery's pirate ship. The exception here is in Uncharted 3 Drake's Deception, which doesn't let you fight primary baddie Catherine Marlowe. Now, in fairness, this is somewhat understandable, because it was probably unreasonable to expect a fight scene where you control Drake and beat an old lady to death. But then again, there are hints throughout the game that Marlowe is into the occult. She's shown messing with tarot cards at one point, so maybe the game could have worked around her age by saying that she had magical powers or something. Anyway, even though there isn't a boss fight, she dies in a cutscene. You could still argue that Marlowe is the most interesting villain in this series because unlike Drake's other foes, she's a psychological threat rather than a physical one, giving our hero a completely different type of challenge to face. Number 5. Colonel Garrett, Days Gone. Days Gone contains a handful of small boss fights littered throughout its lengthy story, none of which are particularly inspired. With the exception of the melee brawls against Carlos and Schizo, they all take place within the open world, and mostly just come down to shoot the target to deplete its health bar. Whether it's a bear, a reacher, or a breaker, it's basically like you're fighting a regular enemy, only that one has a lot more health than usual. With that in mind, it's somewhat of a relief that the game didn't make you fight one of its primary antagonists, militia leader Colonel Garrett, because in all likelihood such a battle would have also just devolved in a bullet sponge gunfight. That being said, considering Garrett's military experience, developer Sony Bend could have got creative here, creating a tactical encounter that forced players to utilise throwables and traps to outwit Garrett and strike when he least expects it. In reality, Garrett was poisoned by Deacon's wife Sarah, who slyly spiked his drink. Call us sadistic, but it was pretty darn satisfying to watch such an intimidating figure be taken down by something as simple and mundane as a cup of tea. Number 4. DOLZAEV, Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. While ruthless terrorist DOLZAEV died without facing hero Raiden in battle, he at least had the balls to make sure that his death was as memorable as they come. Early on in Platinum Games' fast, fluid, and insanely fun Metal Gear spin-off, protagonist Raiden heads out on a mission to capture DOLZAEV, believing that doing so will weaken Desperados, a military company consisting of cyborg soldiers, forces. Given that setup, most players probably expected that a combat-fueled run-in with DOLZAEV was inevitable, but the game doesn't play out in this manner. Instead, he's blown to pieces before Raiden can even touch him. After the katana-wielding protagonist slices and dices his way through a different boss, Mistral, who was an impaled romantic connection to DOLZAEV, DOLZAEV grows angry, and refusing to surrender, he stands on top of a massive oil tank and blows the damn thing up, dousing the surrounding area in a thick layer of fire and smoke. Though DOLZAEV didn't have much to do in the game, this was a pretty epic way for him to exit the scene. Number 3. Scarecrow, Batman: Arkham Knight. Batman Arkham Knight is a great game, but annoyingly, it doesn't contain any compelling boss battles. Almost 5 years on, it's genuinely quite hard to recall a single memorable encounter from a gameplay perspective with a villain from Batman's iconic gallery of rogues. From the Mr. Freeze sequence in Arkham City to the intense Deathstroke brawl in Arkham Origins, the series had become known for its often brilliant boss fights, so when Arkham Knight dropped the ball in this regard, it was an extremely noticeable problem, and the issue was only amplified by by the fact that the main villain of the game, SCARECROW, was dealt with via cutscene. The true final boss of the game actually takes place within Batman's mind, as Brucey attempts to fend off Joker's deranged influence while also battling the effects of SCARECROW's fear toxin. After a mental struggle, Batman regains full control of his psyche and gives SCARECROW a taste of his own medicine. Literally, before the villain is carried away by the police. This defeat of SCARECROW is done without any interaction whatsoever, a disappointing turn of events considering that the playable SCARECROW sequences in Arkham Asylum were some of the most memorable parts of that game. Couldn't we at least have got something like that here? Number 2, The Prophet of Truth, Halo 3. One of the most prominent bad guys in the entire Halo series, the Prophet of Truth, was one of the leaders of the Covenant Empire and thus was a driving factor behind the Human-Covenant War that raged for almost 3 decades. Ultimately though, he was defeated in 2007's Halo 3, with the villainous character being given a rather memorable death at the hands of the Arbiter. After Truth captures Johnson and uses him to activate the Halo array, Master Chief, the Arbiter and the Flood show up. After a short playable section on a bridge, Chief reaches Truth, who is already dying after being infected by the Flood. Truth then gives a defiant final statement before being stabbed through the chest by the Arbiter. This entire portion of the game, apart from that aforementioned short playable section, occurs via cutscene, and in this case, the decision to off such an important antagonistic figure with no player interaction totally works. There's some beautiful music playing throughout the cutscene that gives Truth's death a momentous, epic feel, and with Arbiter's badass final line before he strikes the enemy down, "You must be silenced," is a fantastic sequence overall. Number 1, Hugo Strange, Batman Arkham City. Arkham Knight isn't the only game in the series where Batman doesn't fight the main antagonist. This happens in Arkham City too, with the cunning and intelligent Hugo Strange. Not that we expect every single one of Batman's villains to be given an amazing boss fight on par with the series' best, but since Strange was one of the main bad guys of this particular game, it would have been cool to be able to battle him in some way, if only to see how Rocksteady would stage an encounter between Batman and a normal human man with no combat skills to speak of. Instead, Strange had his back stabbed, quite literally, by Ra's al Ghul, revealing that the two villains had been in cohorts all along. Strange then slowly bleeds out, activating an enormous explosion with his dying breath. Ra's straight up murdering Strange was a pretty cool twist, sure, but still, it did sting a little for the intimidating and magnificently bearded professor to be turned into a glorified henchman in his final moments, rather than being given an epic boss battle send-off, something that we know Rocksteady is capable of achieving. And that's our list. Know of any other video game bosses you don't actually get to fight? Let us know in the comments below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. But for now, I've been Kirsten from WhatCulture, and I will see you in the next video.